Humanities, Nalanda University. Sir is a senior visiting professor in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences and Dean of International Relations at the Indian Institute of Technology, Jammu. With a distinguished academic career, spanning institutions such as IIT Kanpur, IIT Delhi, IIT Ropar and IIT Jammu, Professor Boruah has significantly contributed to philosophy, particularly in areas including philosophy of mind, philosophy of aesthetics, ethics and metaphysics. Educated at the University of Oxford, Banaras Hindu University, Professor Boruah is widely recognized for his insightful exploration of philosophical aesthetics, ethics, and theories of self-consciousness. His notable work, Fiction and Emotion, a study in aesthetics and the philosophy of mind, underscores his profound engagement with aesthetic theory and the human emotion. Today, we welcome Sir to dedicate his lecture on Analytic of the Beautiful, drawing from Immanuel Kant's seminal work, The Critique of Judgment, guiding us to a deeper understanding of aesthetic experience and judgment. Sir, I will mute myself and you can begin. Do you want us to keep changing your slides? I think that's a Word document.
Yes, it's a Word document. I can scroll from here, but is it visible?
Yes, that is very clearly visible, sir.
Okay. In that case, I think I shall handle. If I'm in trouble, I shall ask you to. Sure. And how many students are there? And what kind of course of study is this? Of which these are?
So, there is a course in literary criticism and theory that we teach, that we are doing currently to MA World Literature students in the 4th semester. So they are in their final semester. Some students from MA 2nd semester have also joined us for the lecture, and that's.
Okay. Well, had I known this, I would have slightly changed the tenor of the presentation. I didn't know, and I had prepared it in the way it's prepared for a philosophy student. I hope it doesn't matter very much. Because,
I think so too, sir. Yeah.
Yes, because I'm open to interventions, and anytime any student can stop me to explain it. And I shall go slowly. Okay, can I begin now?
Yes, sir, sure. And students, if you have any questions, instead of just abruptly interrupting, it would be better if you could use the chat box to write your questions. Meanwhile, we can take up your questions for the discussions and taking the lecture forward.
Yes.
Is that clear, everybody?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you can go ahead. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Well, here it is. As you can see on the screen, the Analytic of the Beautiful, Immanuel Kant's conception of aesthetics. This particular chapter occurs in one of the 3 famous critiques of Immanuel Kant. These critiques were written by him as what is known as critical philosophy, introducing critical philosophy into the history of philosophy, Western philosophy. And so critique is the common name of these 3. The first one is known as critique of pure reason. Second one, critique of practical reason. And the third one is this one we are dealing with, critique of judgment. The first one, which is critique of pure reason, is more about theoretical reasoning or judgment, that is cognitive judgment, judgment about the world, empirical world. And the second critique, which is critique of practical reason, is about the moral world, not the natural world, but the moral world. And this one is, this third one is about the aesthetic, I shouldn't say aesthetic world, but about aesthetic judgment and also about teleological judgment. Teleological means goal-directed, end-directed judgment. I have been assigned these two tasks of lecturing on the analytic of the beautiful, lecture 1, and the next one is the analytic of the sublime. They both occur in the same critique. All right, that's the background. And as I go along, I shall introduce more background, but not immediately. So what I'm immediately starting with is, in a way, a straightforward account of what is an aesthetic judgment for Kant. And he explores the nature of aesthetic judgments concerning beauty. For instance, if you say, this is beautiful, you are making an aesthetic judgment, a judgment concerning beauty. He also calls it a judgment of taste. And students of literature would be very familiar about matters of taste in the aesthetic sense. Kant aims to analyze, A, what constitutes, I mean, you see this in the very first paragraph of this write-up, what constitutes a judgment of beauty, and then tries to explain, B, how such judgments, though rooted in subjective experience, can claim universal validity. So I think we can immediately discern that Kant is posing something like a dilemma, and we can problematize Kant's theory of aesthetic judgment or judgment of taste by posing, or rather by describing the dilemma in the following way. And it's what I call the dilemma of objectivity and subjectivity of taste. In other words, we all know that when it is a matter of taste, aesthetic taste, it's a matter of experience. And if it is a matter of experience, definitely it becomes subjective. But now the problem is, if it is a purely subjective matter, does it gain any kind of universality, or because of being subjective, it is condemned to a kind of irreducible relativism? Okay. In other words, whether there is no objectivity to an aesthetic judgment, if an aesthetic judgment is ultimately subjective in nature because of being grounded in our experience of what we consider to be beautiful. So these two stars you see right here, one is, I'm stating that dilemma, when we experience a thing as beautiful, are we registering a genuinely objective property that the thing has, independently of our response to it? For instance, if I find a particular flower beautiful, I'm responding effectively to that object, the flower. And now this aesthetic judgment that this flower is beautiful, whether the aesthetic property is a property of that object, an objective property of the flower, or if you look at the second star, or are we simply reacting to it subjectively, as when we feel pleasure or displeasure in something we eat or drink? I mean, here, the example of eating and drinking is cited because whether in the case of eating and drinking, of course, we have a subjective experience of liking or disliking it, being pleased or being displeased. And that sort of subjectivity is completely relative. What you find pleasant to eat, I might find it to be unpleasant to eat. And same thing about drinking. So our aesthetic judgments, like judgments about eating and drinking, preferential judgments about eating and drinking. So this is the dilemma. Is it possible for there to be a kind of judgment, which is not objective, because the judgment is about experience, and yet it involves our claim to universal validity? I'm recasting that dilemma in still another way in this blue font statement. That is to say, granting that an aesthetic judgment is a judgment about an experience, what we call an aesthetic experience, how something we consider beautiful affects our experience. If it is, in that sense, experience, does this sort of judgment completely lack any objectivity? Or does it still have some sort of universal validity despite its being subjective? In other words, it's like if you have the subjective-objective duality, one might, in a very black and white way, say that if it is subjective, it's not universal. If it is universal, it has to be objective. Okay? Now, the dilemma with aesthetic judgments, and any student of literature would realize, is that, after all, in literature or in our study of art, when we are appreciating or interpreting a work of art, especially appreciating a work of art, or appreciating something which is a natural landscape or scenario as beautiful, we are expressing something which is grounded in our experience, therefore something which is clearly subjective. And yet, if it is a serious judgment about our subjective experiential state, aesthetic experiential state, we would not want to say that, well, if I say Shakespeare's Macbeth is a great work of art, it's like saying, well, the meal that I had last night in the restaurant was a great meal. It couldn't be that kind of a judgment, because the judgment about the meal being a great meal doesn't carry universal validity or any kind of validity more than a relative validity. But when it comes to aesthetic judgments, the claim, the judgment carries some sort of implication of, if not fully 100% universal validity, at least near universal validity, or at least a far more general validity, not just completely relative sort of validity. All right, now, Kant responds to this dilemma by arguing that judgments of beauty are neither objective nor merely subjective. Okay? Because he says, since aesthetic experience is a matter of affective response to the object, it has to be subjective. And as a subjective judgment, it is distinct from what we call cognitive judgments. For instance, judgments about what is good or what is perfect. Okay, Now, next paragraph, in spite of this dependence on the individual's own affective response, according to Kant, judgments of beauty should not be regarded as merely subjective. They are subjective, but they are not merely subjective like your subjective response to, let's say, a beautiful dress or a very delicious meal. Okay, your delicious meal might be a terrible meal for me, but in the case of aesthetic response, if I say Milton is a great poet, that aesthetic judgment is supposed to carry a much stronger weight of it being accepted by, if not fully universally, as something generally acceptable. Okay, now, okay. Now, this point, I'm going to the next page. So, to answer this problem, Kant is structuring his analysis of aesthetic judgment or judgment of taste by structuring it around what he calls 4 moments. And these moments are more like, argumentative moments. Okay, they're not temporal moments, they're argumentative moments. They are features, characteristics of what he considers to be an aesthetic judgment. And these are 4: quality, quantity, relation, and modality. Okay, I shall go quickly because the first 2 are not very problematic. The third is more like the second. It's the third one, the moment called relation, which is the really complicated one. And we should spend most of our time discussing this third moment, the moment called relation. All right. All right, let's take the first moment. What is the first moment? Which he names quality. And by quality, he is referring to what is the nature of an aesthetic experience when you have that experience in judging something to be beautiful. A flower is beautiful, or a music is wonderful, etc. And the point is that it is the essence of an aesthetic experience that you get pleasure out of it. Your affective response is a response of pleasure. So what's the nature of this pleasure? Because after all, there are all kinds of pleasures. So how does the pleasure of aesthetic experience differ from non-aesthetic pleasure, experiential pleasure? Well, he says, beauty isn't about the object's properties, but the subject's feeling of pleasure in perceiving it. This pleasure isn't intellectual or practical. It's aesthetic, meaning it's tied to how the object affects our faculties of mind. Now here, I could connect this to a very common idiom when we say beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. Everybody uses that idiom. What is meant by that? The object that I find beautiful, the property called beauty doesn't lie in the object that I find beautiful. It rather lies in the mind, in me, in my mind, responsive mind, which finds the object beautiful. So that's what it means to say beauty lies in the eye of the beholder. So that's the subjectivity of aesthetic experience and aesthetic pleasure. Okay? So it's a matter of how particular objects affect our mind so as to elicit a kind of experience which is pleasant in nature. And what's the quality of that pleasure? And the answer is, the pleasure is of a distinctive kind. It is disinterested. Now, disinterested doesn't mean uninterested. Okay? Disinterested means the kind of pleasure that you have is not connected to desire for something, for instance. Excuse me. It simply means if you're enjoying it, you are enjoying the beautiful object for its own sake, okay? Not for the sake of anything else, for the sake of any ulterior motive. So the disinterested character of the feeling of aesthetic pleasure distinguished them from non-aesthetic judgments based on feelings such as what Kant calls judgments of the agreeable. For example, I like filtered coffee, okay? Judgment of the beautiful differs from judgment of the agreeable, because in the judgment of the agreeable kind, you have these instances like I like filtered coffee, or I like blue shirts, I prefer woolen clothes over some other kind of clothes, etc. Those are judgments of the agreeable. They are pleasant, no doubt, just as aesthetic pleasure experience judgments are about pleasure. But judgments of the agreeable are all desire-laden. They are interested. That is to say, they are not disinterested pleasure. They are, in this sense, interested pleasure connected with desire. All right? So the point of disinterested aesthetic pleasure is that you take the object, the beautiful object at which you are pleased for its own sake. And therefore Kant calls them contemplative or pure pleasure. Okay? Aesthetic pleasure is pure in nature and contemplative in kind. And by contemplative, it means you simply contemplate on the experience for its own sake without connecting it to anything towards which you might have some desire. Now we move to the second moment, which is quantity, quantity. Now, by quantity, he means universal validity. Now, this is again that point I started with, that even though judgment of beauty is subjective in character, it still has universal validity. And one can imagine that any theorist about aesthetic judgment would want to claim universal validity for the judgment. Otherwise, it would be a pointless judgment, because at any point of time, you could dismiss the judgment as being whatever, frivolous or very, very partial, etc. And that is not what an aesthetic judgment is supposed to be. So universal validity is another moment or another feature of aesthetic judgment. And in saying it has universal validity, what Kant implies is that when you have the pleasure in something you find beautiful, in the aesthetic sense of beautiful, then you somehow believe that this object that you find beautiful and you find also pleasant ought also to be found to be beautiful by others. That means the kind of pleasure you are experiencing in it is a shareable pleasure. Others should also be able to share the same kind of pleasure in the same sort of situation. So that's the meaning of universal validity. And however, this last statement on this page, it says, judgments of beauty cannot, despite their universal validity, be proved. There are no rules by which someone can be compelled to judge that something is beautiful. Now, the point is that when you, standardly speaking, talk about a judgment as being universally valid, that's a very logical claim, because validity is a feature of logic. And you talk about an argument being valid, for instance. Okay, so but aesthetic judgments, even though they are universally valid, they cannot be. This universal validity cannot be logical in kind. It is because it's not a matter of proof. You cannot prove an aesthetic judgment to be universally valid. So this universal validity is not a matter of proof. In that case, what is it a matter of? That's a question. If it is not a matter of proof, then what is its universal validity a matter of? Okay. Why am I scrolling? I'm having difficulty in scrolling. I'm not able to get to the third moment. It jumps to the fourth moment. I don't know why. Can somebody help me in scrolling it from your end? Okay, I'll look at something else. Yes, the third moment is, before the third moment. Yeah, so what makes aesthetic judgments universally valid? The universality of judgments of beauty is not objective universality of proof, but subjective universality. That is to say, it stems from what Kant calls a shared human capacity for aesthetic feeling. Because these aesthetic judgments or aesthetic responses are grounded in the shared cognitive faculties of all humans to experience pleasure in the beautiful. That means we all have the same cognitive faculties. Okay? So if one subject has an aesthetic pleasure in an object considered beautiful, then others should also have the same pleasure because others share the same cognitive faculty that one has. So it's the shared human capacity, cognitive capacity, that accounts for this universality, which is therefore called subjective universality. Okay. Now, the third moment, I'm not able to move the screen here. There is some problem. So I'm looking at another screen. The third moment is the most difficult one, purposiveness without purpose. So here Kant talks about beautiful objects that of aesthetic judgment to be without any purpose, because if you are appreciating an aesthetic object for its own sake, definitely you are not appreciating it, or you are not judging it to be an object that serves any kind of purpose. Okay? Like the way, if you are appreciating a knife, it's because of the functional property of the knife that you appreciate it or judge it to be, say, a good knife. But that's not how you appreciate an aesthetic object, and therefore you appreciate it as without having any purpose. The object that you find beautiful is found pleasant not because it serves any purpose, but because it is what it is, just because of its form, the way the form of the object, the configurational appearance of the object is found beautiful. And the matter ends in that formal regard. And incidentally, in aesthetic theory, formalism is a very famous position, okay, that art is essentially formal in nature. Formal property like poetry's meter, rhythm, etc. Those purely aesthetic properties, these formal properties constitute what the essence of a work of art. So Immanuel Kant's position on this third moment makes that formalism quite apparent. And okay, now what would be an example of formal purposiveness? That is to say, the object doesn't have any functional purpose, but it does have a formal purpose. He says formal, and by that he means, let me give an example. Suppose you are looking at a flower, you find it beautiful. Now, does the flower's petals do the flower's petals look purposeful? Well, I mean, if you say, well, they look purposeful to me because I can sell them in the market by creating some designs, then you are not looking at the petals of the flower from the aesthetic point of view. Okay, you're looking at it from a non-aesthetic point of view, and the purposive point of view is a non-aesthetic point of view. Therefore, if you're looking at the flower or appreciating the flower from the aesthetic point of view, enjoying the configuration of the petals, the color of it, etc., the vividness of it, it's not because of having any purpose, but those forms themselves look purposeful to you. It looks as though, those forms have been designed by nature just to serve, just to suit you, just to please you. There is a kind of fitness between the way the object is formed and the way you are able positively to adapt to it, to respond to it with pleasure. Okay, so that is the third moment. And I shall explain this later because it's more complicated, but let me quickly move on to the fourth and the last moment, which is modality. And this is known as necessity, which means that aesthetic judgments also have the property of being necessary, not just contingent, but necessary. By necessity, what is meant is that my pleasure, my aesthetic pleasure, stands in a kind of necessary relation to the object which elicits this pleasure, where this necessity can be described as normative. That means he calls it exemplary necessity. It's not logical necessity. He calls it exemplary necessity because in the sense that one's judgment, aesthetic judgment, itself serves as an example of how everyone ought to judge it. For instance, you find the sunset, an evening sunset, very beautiful, and you are deriving aesthetic pleasure out of it. Now, this aesthetic judgment on your part, of course, it's an individual subjective response, but it's not just in being an individual subjective response, it's not something that has no validity for others, okay? Because the object is such and your response to it is such that you are providing a kind of example of how one can really appreciate and feel pleased at something like this. That means others with similar cognitive makeup and faculty and tendencies would also find it equally pleasant. So that's the sense of exemplary necessity, which is very much like universal validity, the second moment. All right. Okay, now let me move faster because I think I'm taking too much time and I may not be able to cover much. Okay. There is some problem in scrolling. I'm having problems. I don't know why. Maybe. Okay, now I need to say something about the general background of Kant's philosophy, especially to explain that third moment, which, as I said, is the crux of the whole thing. In his general philosophical understanding, for the possibility of knowledge, there are three things. Three things are responsible by their interactive relation for the possibility of human knowledge. By human knowledge, I mean knowledge of the natural world, okay? What we call cognition, yeah? Through perceptual mechanism. And these three are sensibility, understanding, and imagination. Sensibility simply refers to the sensory data or sensory input that we have through our sense organs. We get information from the environment through our sensory organs. Okay. After all, you have to have the raw sensory data as an ingredient of knowledge. Now, understanding is that which has concepts which it applies to raw data so that it can structure that raw data into intelligible experience. For example, when a baby is just born, what kind of sensibility or sensory input or sensory experience the baby has? I mean, just born baby, I mean, it's very likely that it means nothing, the experience means nothing to the baby. The baby simply has what that famous psychologist William James called blooming, buzzing experiences or sensations. That's because the baby is too young to be able to have the faculty called understanding, whereby concepts are generated. And until and unless concepts are applied to the raw data of sensations or sensory organs, there will not be what we call intelligible experience. For instance, the moment we say, "Oh, this is a bottle of water," or "This is water," for instance, something which is a visual input. By making this judgment, "This is water," we are expressing an intelligible experience, or in fact, we are making a cognitive claim. I know that this something is water. That means I have acquired the concept of water, and I have applied that concept water to the raw visual sensations offered by sensibility. So sensibility is a faculty, understanding is a faculty, and then imagination is another faculty. What is the role of imagination? Now, when sensibility offers or provides raw data, raw sensory data, imagination is the faculty which puts them together to form into coherent images or representations. Okay? Now, all these three are cooperating. That is to say, while imagination is representing or these data of sensibility into coherent images, that representation is supervised or rather governed by the concepts that understanding provide. And together, when this interaction takes place, we end up making what we call cognitive judgments, like that is a flower, this is a bowl of water, or over there it is a tree, like that. Okay. Yes. And now we all know that imagination has the power to fly, its wings in so many directions, almost limitlessly. Okay, so imagination could even get wild, and that means it can form so many strange representations or images that many of those would be really, if you like, fictitious. Okay. But by generating fictions, you don't have knowledge. Therefore, there is understanding as a kind of governing principle with concepts, so that when with those governing rules or principles of concepts, understanding controls the imagination, then imagination sort of does it work in order not to create fictions, but to create those images or those representations which can really lead to knowledge, like, well, this is water, or that is flower, like that. Okay, so that's the kind of philosophy that you get of Kant in his very first critique, the Critique of Pure Reason. As a matter of fact, it is the critique of pure reason which is the primary basis of all of his later philosophies. Okay, so it has the central place and foundational to all other critiques, including this critique of judgment, which is about aesthetic judgments. All right, now next page. Yes. All right. Now imagine when, of course, sensibility is always providing us with sensory data. Okay. And understanding is always providing us with general concepts. And and imagination is serving both of them by behaving under the control of understanding, okay? And that's how knowledge is possible or cognition is possible. Now, imagine a situation in which imagination is under the control of understanding in forming new representations of sensibility, but the understanding is not dominating over imagination. Understanding is just keeping a kind of kind of overseeing role, in which case the situation would be some kind of a free play between imagination and understanding. Okay, this notion of free play of imagination and understanding is a very, very important notion, because in aesthetic experience, unless imagination is in free play in relation to understanding, aesthetic experience would not be possible. Because for aesthetic experience to be possible, you have to be free from the conditions of purely cognitive judgment, in which understanding controls the imagination fully. Okay? So, according to Kant, there is this possibility of understanding relaxing its control over imagination, and thereby opening up a kind of open-endedness whereby aesthetic appreciation is possible. It is this free play of imagination and understanding which is responsible for aesthetic experience. Okay. Let me give an example. I have these 3 examples here in front of you. Imagine that you are looking at a seashell. Maybe you are on a beach. And what's happening is that your imagination is dancing over the curves of the seashell. They have beautiful curves. While your understanding finds a vague order. By vague order, what is meant is that, of course, understanding immediately recognizes that it is a seashell because it has the concept seashell. Okay. Now, if understanding were simply to apply the concept seashell and not bother about how the imagination is dancing over its curves, in that case, it would not elicit any aesthetic experience. On the contrary, it would elicit only a cognitive judgment. There would be no aesthetic judgment. The cognitive judgment would be, this is a seashell. But when you are enjoying, the seashell, finding pleasure in the seashell because of some kind of aesthetic experience, it's not because of your cognitive recognition that it is a seashell. It's because your imagination is able to have that free play of dancing over its curves. And you are not, understanding is, of course, constantly conscious of the fact that it is a seashell, but then understanding is not commanding the imagination to say, look, you cannot jump around or fly away, with the wings of imagination to dance over its curves. It doesn't do that. Okay? In that case, your imagination explores its curves and patterns. So understanding lets the imagination to explore, to go into these free moves, which is not the case in pure cognitive judgments. That's the difference between a cognitive judgment and an aesthetic judgment. Okay, and so that's how you are able to enjoy it aesthetically. In other words, if you had a purely cognitive mind and a completely closed cognitive mind, you would not be an aesthetic subject at all, a subject having any aesthetic experience or aesthetic pleasure or aesthetic judgment. But thank God that we are not just purely cognitive beings. And that is because the relation between understanding and imagination can relax so that understanding lets imagination have more freedom, but not complete freedom as to create only fictions, not complete freedom as to, let it have only fantasies. It is still under some cognitive control, but not so much as really to confine it to pure cognition. This is a very important point. The second example, sunset. Imagine you are enjoying a sunset. Your aesthetic judgment is that this sunset is beautiful, which means you are affected by the colors and forms which spark your imagination. Your imagination is sparked by the colors and forms of the sunset. And now, what is understanding doing? Well, again, understanding, of course, is aware that it is sunset. That means this object is defined by the concept sunset. Okay, that much of awareness is there. But that concept application is not the primary business here in this case. It would be the primary business in the case of a purely cognitive judgment. But since it is not a case of cognitive judgment, it's an aesthetic judgment, the understanding relaxes its conceptual control over imagination and allows imagination again to dwell on the colors and forms of the sunset. And that's how you derive aesthetic pleasure. The last example is a work of art, like a painting. You find a painting beautiful, okay? And what makes such a painting beautiful on the Kantian account is this, that obviously there are myriads of concepts in play with the imagination which can never settle on a single interpretation of the painting. That means your imagination is, as it were, dwelling on the painting with a myriad of concepts and so many ideas, so many concepts are playing in your mind, such that you can never settle on any particular or single interpretation of the object with a single concept. That is again because the understanding is allowing the imagination that much of freedom, all right, whereby you are able to have aesthetic pleasure. Now, to the last point for today's lecture, that purposiveness without purpose, which is about the third moment. We need to be a little more explanatory of this rather oxymoron, you know, purposiveness without purpose. It's an oxymoron, but it has a sense. In the first critique, Immanuel Kant says that that purpose means, and it's a special meaning of purpose, okay, which is there in the Critique of Pure Reason. It means the object. This is a quotation. The object of a concept. Purpose is the object of a concept insofar as the concept is regarded as the cause of the object. Now, I'm 100% sure if you are not exposed to Kant's philosophy, you will say, what kind of nonsense is this? How can a concept be regarded the cause of the object? But the meaning is this. Again, going back to the Critique of Pure Reason about cognitive judgments. Suppose somebody is, suppose your visual experience is of something, okay? And then you say, this something that you see is a rabbit, okay? What have you done? That something was delivered by your sensory organs, you know, something, you know, some sensory input. And since your understanding, what Kant calls the faculty of understanding, has concepts, you possess the concept rabbit, and therefore you apply the general concept rabbit to this particular sensory datum. And then you say, this object is a rabbit. Okay. Now, what has happened? The identity of the object is given by what? It is given by the concept rabbit. Okay. That is the sense in which the concept causes the object. In other words, if you did not have the concept rabbit, you would not have any idea of the object, okay, of this particular object. And therefore, he says, we don't get, what's happening? We don't get objects. Again, scrolling, I have a problem with scrolling. I'm sorry, I don't know how to scroll, or something is there. Something is a problem. You don't get objects without concepts to serve as a rule. in this sense, concepts truly are the causes of objects. Concepts make objects possible. Okay? So, for example, there is some particular entity called a tree precisely because the sensory data of that particular something is properly subsumed under the general concept tree. Okay, so in this sense, purposiveness refers to the causality of the concept with respect to the object. Now, this is exactly how cognitive judgments are in place, as judgments about particular objects of a certain kind. That means any cognitive judgment you make is a case of applying a concept to an object or to some sensory data, and thereby, in some sense, making that object possible. Had you lacked concepts, you would have lacked objects also. You would have had no conception of an object if you were empty of concepts. All right. Now, that is true about cognitive judgments. Aesthetic judgments are not cognitive judgments. Because by making an aesthetic judgment like this is beautiful, you are not exercising your cognition like the way you exercise your cognition when you say, this is a banyan tree or something like that. Because aesthetic judgment is not about objects, but about our affective response to the object. And in that sense, aesthetic judgments have an irreducible subjectivity. Okay, since they are not about objects, therefore, there cannot be any sense of purposiveness about aesthetic judgments, because purposiveness is connected with objects and concepts. No pre-given concept is provided in aesthetic judgment, which is why they are called reflective judgments. So this is the contrast. Aesthetic judgments are reflective judgments contrasted with cognitive, or what Kant calls determinative judgments, judgments that are determined by a concept. Aesthetic judgments are not determined by any concept. However, even if in that sense aesthetic judgments are not purposive, aesthetic judgments are still not quite purposeless. And this is the oxymoron that problematizes this point. I mean, Kant is pushing you into the situation of accepting aesthetic judgments as primarily purposeless because they are not about concepts, they are not cognitive. And at the same time, he's saying, even though they are not purposive in that sense, they are not quite purposeless because of that. So this expression, purposiveness without purpose. And there he talks about, to explain this otherwise paradoxical statement, he talks about formal purposiveness. That means there is no real or actual purposiveness about aesthetic judgments. There's a formal purposiveness. And what is that? The purposiveness we feel is not from the object, but rather from the representation of the object without any purpose. In other words, the mere form of purposiveness by which an object is given to us. Now, again, this is not an easy statement, so we need to analyze it. And the analysis goes something like this. When we judge something as beautiful, anything, a sunset or a painting, or a seashell, it feels as though this beautiful object is structured with an intention and a meaning, although the intention or a meaning is not tied to any actual or determinate goal. That means it seems as though this beautiful object is designed either by nature or by artifact. It is designed in such a way that it would suit our sensibility, our perception, and create a sense of pleasure, please us. Our effective response would be that of pleasure. So take the example of a flower again. A flower's delicate structure and vibrant colors might seem perfectly suited to delight us, as if nature crafted it for our enjoyment. Now, of course, we cannot literally accept that nature has really crafted flowers for our enjoyment. No, but that's how it feels to us. Okay, it's a kind of as if feeling. Yet, in a judgment of taste, we don't care about its biological purpose. I mean, that's the sense in which it is purposeless or practical use. It is purposive merely in the form, because the very form of the flower, the formal configuration, seems to suit us to our sensibility, and it looks as though some purpose has been already served by that, by the very design of nature. Likewise, if we take the example of a symphonic a work of art, like a symphonic music, when you listen to a symphonic music, you definitely feel the music intricately composed. Of course, you could have a 100-piece orchestra in a symphony, and so the composition has to be very intricate, as if every note fits a grand design meant to please the human mind. Okay? Now, of course, music composition is not composed as a kind of design to serve some purpose. It is simply composed because it is supposed to be a work of art, not because it is supposed to fulfill some other purpose. So the purposiveness of the music lies in the experience itself, not in what utilitarian purpose it might serve. That means you find the experience itself very suitable to you. It is as if the artistic design is meant just for that. In short, purposiveness without purpose means that beauty gives us the impression of design or intentionality without serving any specific end beyond the free, harmonious play of our faculties. It's the heart of Kant's idea that aesthetic judgment is a unique reflective act, not a cognitive act. It's neither knowledge nor action, but a pure contemplative delight. That's why when you talk about aesthetic enjoyment, you enjoy it for its own sake, not for anything else, not for its having any connection with any other desire. For its own sake, that's the key of aesthetic experience. And that's also central to the nature of aesthetic judgment. So to end this lecture, the beautiful object's purposiveness hints at a harmony between the natural world, which gives us the object, and our cognitive faculties, which find it pleasing. Yet, it remains free from the deterministic laws of nature or the strict rules of reason. In other words, when it comes to cognition, and you have to make cognitive judgments, you have to be very particular about which object is what. Okay, that means you have your cognitive judgment has to be in accordance with the deterministic laws of nature. For instance, if you see a pond of water, you can't say, "Oh, that's a body of stones," because that is not stone. That's water, and it's not being stone. It's rather being water. Is in accordance with the deterministic laws of nature, and your cognition is bound by those deterministic laws of nature. So there is no freedom in cognitive judgment in that sense. But when it comes to aesthetic judgment, we do see the freedom, okay? The freedom of the imagination to move in so many directions whereby it's able to derive aesthetic pleasure. And that freedom, that free play of the imagination is so central to aesthetic judgment or aesthetic experience that Kant wrote about it in this Critique of Pure Reason and dealt with it in this particular chapter, Analytic of the Beautiful. Well, that's about it. Okay. I finished and I'm open for discussion now.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Yes, please go ahead.
You talk about this idea of free play of imagination, free from cognitive judgment. But I don't understand pretty well. What is the support of this reflective judgment? Is rationality there, or how we can define it in Kant terms?
All right. When we talk about rationality or the use of reason, it has so many meanings. For instance, when it comes to standard cognitive judgment, how is it rational? Okay, how does reason play a role in the formation of cognitive judgments? Well, there the rationality of cognitive judgment is a matter of how sensory experience is brought under the control of abstract concepts. Okay, so there's a kind of strict rule-governed system there. I shall have some sensory data or sensory input through my sense organs, and until and unless I apply an appropriate concept to those data, that sensory data doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't appear intelligible at all. It doesn't become an intelligible experience. So concept application is the rationality of cognitive judgment. But in reflective judgment, I mean, aesthetic judgment is described as a kind of reflective judgment. And by the way, reflective judgment, aesthetic judgment is not the only reflective judgment is not only aesthetic judgments. There could be, judgments about the sublime also, or teleological judgments that would also be reflective. But for today's discussion, in reflective judgments, which are aesthetic judgments in this case, there is, of course, sensory experience. I mean, you look at the sunset you are standing in front of and you are enjoying it. Yeah, there is sensory data, but you're not making sense of that data by the application of the concept sunset. Of course, you do recognize that what you see is a sunset, but that's not the focus. The focus is the various color combinations and the kind of atmospheric scenario it creates, by which you are moved, and the way your imagination dwells on the different aspects of the of this sensory presentation. That is what makes it a matter of aesthetic judgment. So, of course, it's not irrational or non-rational. It is also rational, but it's not rational in the way cognitive judgments are.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Can I have another question?
Yes, why not? Please go ahead.
Yes. Is there any space for mythology or myth in Kant theory? Some idea of allegorical narrative?
That is a more advanced and extended sort of question, more into literary theory, of course, understandably. And yes, allegorical narratives are a way of creating distinctive works of art, obviously. Okay. And so, I mean, if you're responding to an allegorical narrative, then that is also an aesthetic response, an aesthetic judgment you're making. You're deriving aesthetic pleasure out of it. Mm-hmm. And so whatever theory is now being talked about in terms of this reflective judgment, in terms of the four moments that Kant talks about in the Analytic of the Beautiful, all of them would be applicable. For instance, it would have disinterested pleasure, according to Kant's theory, universal validity, purposiveness without purpose, and exemplary necessity. So, it doesn't matter which example you take, whether you take a work of art like an allegorical narrative or a painting, the same thing would apply, I think.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Do we have any other question?
Hello, sir. This is Aman Raj from SLLH.
Hello.
Student.
Hello. Yes.
Yes, sir. So I want to ask the question about the third moment and the fourth moment you have just discussed,
Yes.
Which I thought the formalism you have discussed in that and the model. So will you elaborate that?
Okay. Yes. Right. This is about a purposiveness without purpose, which is a defining feature of how we perceive beauty. In fact, I'm reading it again. Beautiful objects appear as if they were intentionally designed to delight our senses and our cognitive faculties, and yet they lack any specific practical purpose. Now, that is to say, when we look at, let's say, a work of art or a natural landscape and derive aesthetic pleasure out of it, what is evoking that aesthetic pleasure in us? What in that object, in that presentation is drawing our affective response of pleasure? Kant's answer is that not the thing itself, but the formal features, the configurational character of it. Okay? That's what formalism is all about in aesthetic theory. You know, art is all about forms, and from where you have the formalist school, different versions of formalism or formalist schools. That is the view that Kant subscribes to very strongly, that the form of the object is the proper aesthetic focus of aesthetic response. So, now, of course, when you talk about purpose, one would say, wherever we talk about purpose, we have to mean the purpose that the object has or object serves. Now, if you say that aesthetic attention is not really focused on the object, but only on the formal properties of the object, then in a way it sounds as though you are underplaying the object as such, the matter of the object as such, and overplaying the formal qualities. And since you are indulging or dwelling on mere formal qualities, it definitely doesn't become purposive, because serving a purpose would require not just the form, but the form as well as the matter taken together. Okay, probably that's how Kant looks at it. Okay, that's the kind of formalism that he is espousing. Maybe you have something more to say about it.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, Gordana.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the lecture, inspiring. I'm Gordana Jovanović. I'm a professor of psychology, University of Belgrade, Serbia, and here at Nalanda University, I'm in Hindu studies.
Oh, hello.
You have explained that a claim of universal validity is derived from shared human capacity.
Yes.
If I understood you correctly.
Yes.
And this is, that assumption is actually an enlightenment concept and assumption which we can find also in other theories or thinkers. So, for example, I can refer to Schleiermacher, a German scholar who developed, who contributed substantially to development of hermeneutics. And yes. So he also refers to shared human capacities as condition of possibility of understanding beyond local context and time.
Yes.
So it is very much saturated with humanistic appeal and values. So my question would be whether that claim of universal validity is still justified under different conditions nowadays. So I would say under regime, Chomsky will forgive me, manufacturing differences at any price. As a consequence of that, there's really almost everyday experience of impossibility of understanding another human being. And consequently, what would be then the consequences for aesthetics in Kantian sense? Or in other words, can Kant's aesthetic still claim universal validity as a theory at a meta level? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. It's opening up the matter to so many wider horizons. It's true. By the way, I think Schleiermacher came much later, didn't he? Kant was of the 18th century. Schleiermacher, what's the date? Can you tell me of Schleiermacher?
Well, it's not much. Kant died 1844. So Schleiermacher is some decades after. That's still in that sense. Not quite, but still it is the epoch, I would say.
Same epoch. Yes. Now, you're quite right. Kant was one of the forerunners of the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment had this idea of human commonality, those narratives, those grand narratives of human commonality, etc. And Kant's aesthetic theory is, I suppose, attuned to that Enlightenment conception of human commonality. And when you talk about Schleiermacher is adding to that very tune. And when you talk about today's tendency of manufacturing, you said something like differences rather than commonalities. Yeah, it sounds very postmodern and a sort of suspicion against any kind of grand narratives. All right. So in a temperament like this, whether Kantian aesthetics can survive at all, if that is the sort of question you have in mind, I would say obviously not. Because if manufacturing difference has become the motto, then it is pretty anti-enlightenment as well. And therefore, where Kant is and where this sort of postmodernism is, there is a world of difference. I think the respective aesthetic theories will be at loggerheads with one another. However, anyone who is into literary studies or aesthetic theory even today, would they not consider it as a serious question? That when someone makes an aesthetic judgment, whether about a work of art or a literary work, the judgment carries much more weight than a mere idiosyncratic expressions of difference. Okay? It would be frivolous to say, well, I'm voicing this out, but I know there will be hundreds of different voices to just demolish mine. it would be completely frivolous. So I think that is the way one could probably draw from such theories like Kant's. By drawing from such theories like Kant, I don't mean adopting it, but drawing an inspiration that there must be some truth, some lingering truth in it. Oh, not just lingering, a fairly strong truth in such universalist claims.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Any other question, guys?
Sir?
Yes, yes.
In this aesthetic judgment is a kind of is a source of knowledge in Kant, kind of
Well,
a epistemological, source of knowledge, or is not that?
It is not, because in Kant, problems of sources of knowledge are all dealt with in the first critique.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's the arena of cognition, cognitive judgment. Knowledge is cognition. Aesthetics is, in one sense, it is non-cognitive, non-conceptual aesthetic judgments, because concept application is not its primary concern. So in that sense, it is non-cognitive, non-conceptual, but there is a problem. The problem is that the source of cognition, at least one primary source of cognition, and the complete source of the conceptual is understanding, the faculty called understanding. So, according to Kant, when you make an aesthetic judgment, it's not merely on the basis of the faculty of imagination that you are making the judgment. The understanding is together with the imagination all the time. The only difference is that this togetherness, in the case of the first critique, in the case of the domain of cognitive judgments, this togetherness, this collaboration is extremely close, where imagination is dependent on or constrained by the governing rules of understanding. Here in reflective or aesthetic judgments, there is a relaxation of that relation. The sort of understanding withdraws itself to some extent, but does not withdraw itself fully, and therefore one can't say, according to in Kant's theory, one can't even say that his aesthetic theory or aesthetic judgments are 100% non-cognitive. It's a very critical point. Yeah.
So, in that sense, poetry can be a source of knowledge. At some point.
Yes.
Because you have these two elements that you are talking to or not.
Again, you are extending the problem very far to very important horizons. I mean, do we gain any knowledge by reading poetry? I mean, to put it in a straightforward way.
Yes.
Okay. And the answer would be both yes and no. I mean, for Kant, there is no gaining of knowledge from poetry. If it is, aesthetic appreciation of poetry, there is no gaining of knowledge from poetry if by knowledge you mean cognitive judgments. Because the principles of cognitive judgments are very, very strict, and that's why they are called determinative judgments. Determinative. But in poetry, there is a great deal of indeterminacy. That's why it is open to multiple interpretations.
Yes.
And that indeterminateness is because of the freedom that is allowed to the imagination, while the understanding is, as it were, overseeing the flight of imagination. It's not completely withdrawing, but overseeing it. And to that extent, I think there is a cognitive element, and therefore there is a knowledge element even in the appreciation of poetry.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any more questions? Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. We really extend our sincere gratitude to you for this illuminating exploration of Kantian aesthetics, enriching our appreciation of the philosophy of beauty, deepening our understanding of aesthetic judgments. So we look forward to another engaging lecture, thought-provoking insights on the other lecture, that is Analytic of the Sublime, from the same work, Critique of Judgment by Kant, scheduled for 17th April from the same time, sir, 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m.
Okay. Very, very nice. And
thank you very much once again.
Good night. Good night.
Yeah, good night, sir. Good night.